Welcome to this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. I'm Chris Cordani, your host. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to hit that like button. Also, comment, share, and subscribe to enjoy sneak previews of our videos, exclusive content, and more special programming in the works. Join our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/thought-to-action. As a subscriber, you'll also have access to our Ask Us Anything sessions, which are a lot of fun, where we at the London Center answer your questions. You can also support our efforts by picking some of our merch up on our new Teespring page. The link is in both the video and audio podcast descriptions. Also follow us on social media, Getter, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Also our website, londoncenter.org. Strategy. Yes, that's the word. We know what's going on in Ukraine. The Russians, Vladimir Putin has invaded. He's trying to steamroll his way into reuniting the old USSR under the Putin rule. But while the president thinks his legacy will be solidified by accomplishing this, he has invaded Ukraine forgetting that it wasn't going to be easy. This is where that strategy comes in. And we have gentlemen here from the intelligence community within the London Center, our panel. Let's start with London Center for Policy Research President Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. London Center for Policy Research Senior Fellow, Lieutenant Colonel British Army retired Tim Wilson, and London Center Distinguished Fellow Navy Captain Pete O'Brien. Let's talk about this invasion and Putin's strategy. Gentlemen, what do you see as the Russian president's overall game plan here, and where did he kind of go right and wrong strategy-wise?
Well, he wanted to take over the whole of Ukraine. He wants to recover the whole of the former Soviet Union. He wants to set up the days of the mighty Russian Empire. He wants to be czar of all the Russias at the end of the day. And he's made a mistake. The mighty Russian Empire is, his dreams for it are in the hands of the Russian army. And the problem is that the Russian army is something of a shadow of its former self. And even then, a lot of what its capabilities were pushed as were shadows. As we discovered in 1991, when the wall came down and the Soviet Empire collapsed, their maintenance on their vehicles, much of their military strength in depth wasn't there. And if I may quickly just summarize, there are over 1 million people in the Russian military. But of those, 2/3-ish are conscripts. That leaves him under 1/3 of a million, some of whom are not deployable to the West, the Western end Ukraine. It's plus 2/3 of their army is conscript. And he keeps talking about the fact that they're not using conscripts. Well, that means he's basically committed the whole of the regular Russian army to Ukraine. 136 battalion groups is estimated to be their regular or contract forces. And they all seem to be committed to Ukraine, and they're bogged down.
I think there's 3 areas that Putin did not correctly assess, and I'll walk through them very quickly. So let's start with tactical. Russians are burdened with a Cold War style army. One of the things that anyone who studies it for more than a day notes that they've got multiple variants of the T-64, T-80, T-72, T-90, and all of that you have to have logistics for. It's complex. I mean, people don't understand this. Like, there's a reason why we've stuck with the M1. It's why the British stay with a single kind of serial of tank. You start messing around with all these different pieces, it gets really complicated very quickly. Then you combine that with a system that's based on, is full of corruption. So the other thing that Putin, I don't think, understood is his own vulnerabilities. And we recognize this in the old Soviet system too. Soviet Union was not going to be able to produce a great number of quality items for their military. That's why we counted on a smaller number, but much better made, much more effective. We saw that in the Gulf War, just looking at the gear that the Russians had sold Saddam Hussein. So his own system, his own military, it's not the best military in the world. They've always counted on numbers, on overwhelming numbers. And that's what they're going to have to. And as Tim just said, I don't think they're going to have the numbers this time to do what they want to do. So that's the tactical level. They've not done a good job of preparing their military. Then operational. man, I've looked at the mess of their strategic reconnaissance, their lack of forward staging of logistics. And to me, look, it threw me off. My initial assessment regarding the invasion was based on the fact I did not see any stores, any major logistics things up front. I'm not sure if that, and I think that goes back to Tim's point about he just thought it'd be over in 2 or 3 days. Well, you know, he fooled us thinking, oh, he's not gonna be a full-blown invasion because he didn't put stores up front. And he hurt himself by the fact he was not ready for a sequel to roll into an extended sustained combat situation, which is now hurting him. Strategic reconnaissance. These people act like they've never done reconnaissance in force. I mean, they're trying to establish paths in over roads, which is probably the best and most efficient way of moving stuff, but then they leave themselves open to ambush constantly. It's just that's bad leadership right there. That's just really bad leadership. You could make the most of any force as long as you have good leadership. And that tells me that, which is going to take me to my strategic point. When you have a system that's based on corruption, no matter how much money you spend in it, some of that money you spent to modernization, preparing the forces and picking leadership, ain't gonna, it's just, they're the ones there. If you're taking money out of the system as Putin has done, made himself a multi-billionaire, all your generals are doing that too. So I think you have corruption all up and down the system, and that corruption has manifested itself to be observed through the complete lack of adequate military capacity at this point in time when it's critical. So that's my assessment of tactical, operational, strategic. They have a flawed system where those flaws are now more apparent than ever. So that's at least my snapshot of assessment for today.
I don't disagree with my compatriots here, but I would add that there is behind all this a couple of glaring problems that the Russians made, and I think perhaps the greatest one was a going-in assumption that Ukraine really wasn't that much of a congealed, hard, separate nation, that it was just sort of a place out there, and those people really were mainly Russians. And once we start this thing, most of them are going to say, oh, well, okay, and they're going to sort of roll over. And instead, what happened here was that Vlad Putin may go down in history as the greatest thing that ever happened to Ukrainian patriotism. He took a vague notion of Ukrainian nationalism and made it as hard as steel. And you now have people who a month ago were, they would shrug and say, yeah, I'm Ukrainian. Now they will stand on the edge of the fires of hell and say that I'm a Ukrainian. He has managed to bring together Ukrainians, unite them in a common cause like no one else ever could have possibly imagined. And because of that, you wind up in a situation where it is possible. I'd still probably, I would probably make the bet if it was a line in Las Vegas. It is still possible that he's going to win the war he wants. He's going to grind down Ukraine by grinding down Kiev, by grinding down Kharkov, by grinding down Mariupol, etc. Yeah, I'd probably bet that way if I was forced to. But in the end, what that will result in is an excruciating insurgency that is going to take, a century to get rid of. He's never going to get rid of it, in fact. And what he has done is he has managed to buy for Russia essentially a generational problem if he doesn't choose to leave, or if his successor does not choose to leave.
Yeah.
This is what's very important, Pete, because you're talking about a nation who's only, a few decades removed of living under Russian rule. It's not like our generations today, which don't remember anything about British rule. I mean, we wouldn't. Even the older generations here don't. But we're talking about over a couple hundred years, and the old saying, hard times bring strong men bring good times bring weak men. Well, we might be on that latter stage when it comes to all the wokeness in our armies and things like that. But as far as Ukraine's concerned, you're talking only a few decades after hard communist I'll say it, hard Russian rule. They don't want that again. You have people who teach history there. They know about Holodomor. They know what it was like. There a lot of young kids, grandparents, and the people who have come of age already, some of them who are still working and still own the mom and pop shops, all know what it was like to be under Russian rule. They're proud of their country. And yes, what Putin might not have remembered was, hey, we could see a major insurgency like you brought up. We could see something worse than what happened in Afghanistan. Oh, Afghanistan marched the Soviets out. We had to leave Afghanistan. This is what's going to happen in Ukraine. There's not going to be a clean occupation.
Yeah. So, and I'd like to believe they've remembered 1933 and Stalin starving them out. I'd like to believe that's something that has motivated them to remember how bad things were under the Russians. With that said, I've said publicly, and I'm not backing away from it, Ukraine's leadership is partly to blame for this. And I know that's an unpopular position to take, but there's a reason why they're not in NATO. NATO did not accept them, at least if you look at the technical reasons, is because of their own governmental corruption. And let's remember, because I'm not going to forget, a guy named Hunter Biden was being paid a lot of money for Burisma to develop oil. And I understand what they were trying to do. They have huge reserves that have been discovered near Donbass and in the Black Sea. And I get it. And that should have been something the Ukrainians should be able to develop for purposes of making themselves economically independent. That's another reason Putin invaded, is because they could not get their act together sufficiently within the past few years. That's why he acted to go into Crimea initially, and that's why they did not, get their act together. So some of this was, I'm not blaming the Ukrainian people. There's a difference. There's a distinction with a difference. I'm not blaming the people of Ukraine. I'm blaming their leadership for having engaged in their own corrupt practices, which prevented from their entry into NATO and getting their act together so that all these resources were ready to develop for the Ukrainian people. That's an issue, and that may be sorted out later. But the leadership in Ukraine are not without fault in what we see developing right now. Just saying. So,
I think, Tony, at this point, it's worth pointing out that you're right. You're absolutely right, and it has similarities to governmental corruption in almost any country, including America, around the world. Zelenskyy has only been the president for a couple of years. He came sort of out of nowhere. And we don't know how successful his anti-corruption platform, which is what he ran on, is going. We do not know. So whilst you're right that there's the background corruption that stopped them getting into NATO, his appeal to join now is understandable and may even be justified.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to.
I agree, but it's just worth. I mean, to me, much more interesting than that part of the corruption is the way that Putin and his thugs are handling the invasion of Ukraine and the strategic mistakes they're making there. We keep talking. Keep your eye on Mariupol, folks. That is actually a 75+% Russian city. Those people being shelled and killed there are ethnic Russians, majority. And the way that he's treating them, there are now a lot of Russians living in Ukraine who are saying, we don't want to be Russian. We want to be Ukrainian. We're proud of being Ukrainian. That was where Pete nailed it earlier on about hardening the Ukrainian resolve, and they are doing an amazing job of holding up what is going to be beastly. And I'm sad to say I also agree the Russian machine will grind on and it will grind down. It will destroy. It is a machine of destruction similar to any invading army. And the mistake that Putin has made, quite frankly, is one that Churchill laid out when he said, if you go to war, as soon as a leader commits to war, he loses control of events. Events now control him.
Right. But to that point, Tim, and this is something I'd like Pete to comment on, Pete has talked about political will. And one of the aspects of political will, which I think has been under addressed or under discussed, is the fact Putin has nowhere to go. Back during the Cold War, at least, there was always a level of outs. And one of the things Pete again pointed out, I want to give credit where credit's due. During the Cold War, we had essentially a back channel, direct back channel between leadership. They could talk to each other. It's like, dude, do you really want to do this? Is this what you really want? We don't have that now. And the problem with not having that with Putin is Putin, I think, the more things go wrong, speaking of not having control, the more he's going to double and triple down. Because one of the things about Vladimir Putin that's made him who he is he is covered for corruption every step of the way. That's how he got promoted. That's how he went from Petersburg to Moscow. He was always the bag man who was the best at covering up. Putin has always been the guy that comes in and is the best guy covering up all the corruption from the guy before. There's nobody to come in. So I think he and the oligarchs are in this together because everybody's talking about, he's alienated the oligarchs. Maybe, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because the oligarchs know that whoever comes in after Putin's going to come after them. So they're not giving up on Putin. Everybody seems to think, they're all upset. Yeah, that could be, but they're not backing off because they don't trust who's going to come after Putin, who's going to come after them. So they're in this to the end. And this is why I believe the potential for escalation is high, because I don't think Putin sees any option except either win it all or die. And that's the way I'm looking at it. Pete, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree. Putin has gotten himself in a situation here. First off, that as you say, there is no retirement plan. So we're not gonna see Vlad throw up his hand and say, "Okay, I quit. I'm moving to the south of France." That's just not going to happen. And nor are the as you say, his compatriots. Imagine, if you will, as an analogy, this is the Russian royal family. In the 100 years ago, there was no place to go. And interesting point was when the Russian royal family started feeling threatened there, right after they were arrested in 1917. Feelers were put out to the various royal families around Europe, and the various royal families around Europe said, "Not my problem." People did not want to have that problem stuck on them. In the end, the royal family was executed, and a lot of the second stringers, the cousins and uncles, were also executed. Vlad looks at that, and Vlad knows that he has no place to go. He's not going to simply be retired. The people who are close to him all have been put in place by him. They are mirrors of him. They are all the same folks, if you will. And so the system is either going to survive or it's going to be overturned, and it's going to be overturned in sort of a classic Russian manner. It's going to be this horrible ousting of a small group of people. And I would add something else too. Vlad isn't stupid. He realizes that they've made a mistake. There's a line from one of the great German generals of 2 centuries ago, Helmut von Moltke the Elder, one of the real great German officers, the fellow who masterminded tactically and operationally the Franco-Prussian War and the wars of German unification. And he made a great statement. It's simple, but it's profound. That errors in tactics can be corrected in the next battle. Errors in strategy can only be corrected in the next war. Now, I would submit to you that the Russians have made an error in strategy. And so the idea is they look out from the Kremlin looking west at Ukraine. They're smart enough to recognize they probably can't actually, no kidding, win this war. They can beat it down into parade rest. They can do what they did in Georgia and Syria and pound a couple of cities into rubble. But in the end, the people of Ukraine will continue to hate them. The people of Ukraine will continue to snipe at them, literally. And this will turn into a long-growing, a festering sore that they will never be able to get rid of. Certainly not in the lifetime of anybody who currently works in the Kremlin. So from their perspective here, the only thing they have left is to hold on really tight, no matter the cost.
The way Tony and Pete have raised a couple of interesting issues. Strategic mistakes. Well, strategic and off ramps and communication. It occurs to me that what the problem with any oligarchic system, any tyranny, which is Vladimir Putin is effectively the tyrant of Russia. People around him are lying to him. People around him are
That's part of the corruption. Tim, that's part of the corruption. Of course.
Absolutely. But here's my question. It raises the issue of, does he actually know that he is losing in Ukraine? And then you have the question of off ramps and how does he back out if he does know that, or is beginning to realize, or only realized a few days ago that he is not winning in Ukraine. What does he do about that? And communication is key. And as was mentioned earlier, quite rightly, in the days of the Soviet Union, we at least had people talking to each other. We had a hotline. What have we done for this conflict? Sent Kamala to Poland? Where is the real communication that would enable discussions of how Putin might be able to back out with at least some face saving?
Let's go back to strategy, gentlemen. Strategy overall, because Vladimir Putin, as you know, he wants to reunite the USSR. He's not going to settle for a new USSR minus Ukraine. But there are a couple more things. He's running out of time. He also sees the Biden presidency as a very small window. It could be a 4-year window or possibly even less. The idea is perhaps he jumped into this in haste. Perhaps he didn't plan this very well, strategy-wise, of course, and he just saw a small window of opportunity, ran in without consideration of an end game. How far off am I here? Where was his end game? What should his end game have been? And perhaps why didn't he plan it?
So I'll just start out with a little story just to help shape the answers for all of us. Tony Zinni once told me a story about his dealings with President Clinton. And Tony Zinni at the time, relating to the story, he was commander of Central Command. This is back in the 90s. And he said that he challenged President Clinton, I think a total of 6 times, and he actually won. He actually won the discussion, I think he said 4 of the 6 times. And he said, but typically he would go in, he would ask to meet with the president when he was asked to do something. And he would sit down and President Clinton would say, General Zinni, can you do X? And Zinni would say, yeah, but then what? So militarily, you could do it, but the problem often was the political instate. What do you do after the military operations are over? And I think this may have been to Chris's point, the point of the question, that there wasn't a clear in-state objective set established. And I do believe Putin is one based on his history of being impulsive and seeing what he thought to be a window of opportunity and did not either have time or an interest in doing or having someone do the necessary political, the necessary strategic planning at the military level, plus an in-state set of objectives that would allow him to settle the peace. So I think it's very possible Putin acted because he saw an opportunity, but did not prepare the in-state of that opportunity adequately. So what do y'all think?
I would agree, but I would add some extra thoughts. I think clearly he saw this as an opportunity. If you look at this dragged out over time, clearly he moved in 2014 into moved Russian elements into Donetsk and Luhansk in 2014. That had dragged on for 8 years. I think he wanted that to end. But at the same time, I go back to the issue of net assessment. I'll throw in a little piece of history to show that folks who are great leaders even and great generals make bad net assessments. And what we have here again, I think, is at its root an operation based upon a bad net assessment. Hannibal invaded Italy, 3rd century BC, utterly convinced that he could beat the snot out of the Romans, and that once he had done that several times, the various city-states of Italy would join him. He spent 17 years as an independent army roaming up and down the Italian peninsula, slapping the snot out of the Romans whenever they showed up. Some of the most amazing battles in history, and no city ever came over to him for any extended period of time. A couple of them came over and then went back. It never worked. He did not understand the nature of the republics of Italy and how they were united with Rome. He didn't understand Rome at all, and he eventually he lost. The same thing, in a certain sense, has happened here. Putin believed that he understood what was going to happen when they invaded Ukraine. He saw an opportunity. The Americans appeared to be weak, and NATO appeared to be weak. And Ukraine wasn't a real country. Come on, I can do this. We'll just go in there. We'll slop them around a little bit. We'll besiege Kiev. They'll surrender. It's going to be great. None of that worked out. Fundamentally didn't understand what was going to happen in Ukraine. The Ukrainian resistance provided steel to the leadership of NATO and the United States. It wasn't the leaders. The leaders weren't in charge. The leaders were following the will of the people, and have continued to follow the will of the people in NATO, in the United States. And so what has happened is this entire net assessment at the strategic level, at the grand strategic level, has been stood on its head. And frankly, I don't see how he gets out of it without just a gigantic sore spot. And you're going to wind up eventually with the Russians doing what they did in Georgia. They're going to pound the associated cities until there is no major resistance left, and they're going to declare themselves to be victorious. They aren't going to be victorious. The pain isn't going to go away, but that's what they're going to tell themselves that they want.
And I agree with Pete. I mean, and I hate to make this all about us, but that's why we lost Afghanistan. We never fundamentally understood the foundational issues of the conflict. You can have the best military force in the world with massive power, but unless you understand the dynamics of how to end it, then, as Pete said, you're just going to have a lot of pain and suffering that comes on the other end of the military operation. So,
stepping back, like Pete, in history, one of the recognized sources of, if you like, wisdom in military affairs is, of course, Sun Tzu, who said, you need to know yourself as well as your enemy. I suspect a large part of Vladimir Putin's strategic mistake here, was going to his generals and saying, "Can we do this?" and then believing them when they said, "Yes, of course we can."
As I've been saying, we as a team have said before, I think we need to look to think the unthinkable. I don't believe unless Putin finds some out, he's going to back down. I don't see any out for him. I think he's going to continue to ratchet up. I heard Jake Sullivan, big eye roll. You can leave that in, by the way, too. I think we should all make it a policy every time we use Jake Sullivan's name, we roll our eyes. Anyway, he was on talking about all the happy talk. I saw one of the State Department folks, this is all progress. No, this is the Ukrainians stopping the Russians is not a good news story. It is for the Ukrainians, I get it, but again, it's Putin's not going to back down, and you're not giving him an out. So I do see the potential of ratcheting it up. And all this stuff you saw that Putin had his military hit that training camp. They did that as a symbolic hit against NATO. That's where some of the stuff's being positioned coming in from NATO. He's going to start hitting it. He's going to make it very clear that you want to use NATO to help the Ukrainians. I'm going to try to pull NATO into this. And he's bound to do it. And I don't think I think it's a good chance he's going to use chemical weapons for the purposes of laying the foundation of new nukes. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you think, though, that he really will challenge NATO? His forces are doing badly enough at the moment. What happens if NATO does get involved?
Because he sees NATO He sees NATO like I see it. It's not ready. It's not ready for prime time. It is not exercised as a coalition in any substantive way against a large military force for a long time. So while I don't believe he thinks it can win, I do believe he thinks he can actually draw some folks into it and maybe make some concessions or push them back a little bit by the bluster. Because remember,
is that his potential off route? He's challenged by NATO and therefore has to back down because
that could be.
And I think that is exactly what he is thinking at this point, is that if he can ratchet this thing up high enough, if we can essentially climb the escalation ladder and scare the snot out of everybody,
yes,
that at a certain point everybody will start running around rubbing their hands raw, rightly so, because it gets scary, and everybody will insist that there's a war, and that allows him to say, well, okay, I'll stop shooting, I'll say it's all good, by the way, I need a few things, and then he lays out a list.
Yeah. Well, that's the point you guys brought up earlier in this discussion. The Russians have a NATO type kind of army or armed forces or strategic infrastructure. They're Cold War oriented, just like NATO. They're not ready for an insurgency type. But if he can fight on his level, if Putin can maybe goad NATO a bit to jump into the fray on that level, then Putin may have a better chance to achieve his goals. And that's not good. The worst thing you could think of is, no, Vlad would never do that. Exactly.
That's my point, Chris. That's my point. We need to stop projecting how we would do something. This is not us. It's not NATO.
Right.
It's not us. It's him. Think about how he sees the world and how he's going to act based on his interpretation, not on what we want him to do. Jake Sullivan is constantly projecting what we want him to do. And Putin sees us like, oh, okay, now I know what they want. This is what I'm going to do. We are not him. He is not us.
And if I could add something, Tony, along those very lines, and this is one of those things I'm not going to say that this is a high probability event, but it is a possible event, is that he deliberately runs this up into a threshold nuclear exchange situation.
Yes.
Specifically because he understands that nobody in the West right now, in the United States, in Great Britain, or in France, is at all prepared to use a nuclear weapon.
Bingo.
And
exactly.
So he runs that essentially that flag up the flagpole, and everybody all of a sudden has shivers going up and down their spine because he is literally talking about using a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And no one has ever considered that, and no one knows how to essentially stare that problem down.
Exactly. Everybody keeps saying it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable. Well, that's why he's going to do it.
Right.
That's right. Don't put it past Vlad.
This is an incredibly dangerous situation, and we just need to hope that somehow that this breaks through some of the fog in Washington D.C. and in London and in Paris, and some folks start recognizing what the horrible possibility is.
I actually did pretty well in my degree in political science. And one of the concepts of the Cold War we studied in the 80s, and I got my degree in 86, so it was probably about 84, 85, is something called brinksmanship. That was something that our side knew very well back in the day. That included Kennedy, JFK. And that brinksmanship often would walk us right up to the precipice of nuclear war, and then sounder minds would intercede. That was a tactic of the Cold War. We have nobody in current leadership who has any understanding of brinksmanship, and I think Putin knows that.
We'll be continuing this discussion in the future because there's just a lot to talk about. A lot of it.
Let's hope.
We're also going to be discussing in the future what China's doing while nobody's looking, and of course what Washington's doing while nobody's looking. So keep your eye on our Thought to Action channel, whether it be on our YouTube, Rumble, or on our audio podcast, because we're available in all those places. I want to thank all of you for being with us for this edition of Thought to Action, presented by the Herb London Center for Policy Research. Please remember to hit that like button. Feel free to comment on our discussion. We want to hear what you think about all this. You think, hey, Vlad wouldn't do that, or I wouldn't put it past him. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our Thought to Action channel as well and pound that big red bell for updates on future shows. Find out more about the London Center at our website, londoncenter.org. You can also support our work by enjoying some of the cool merchandise. And yes, it's cool. Found in our Teespring store, the link's in the description. And keep your eye out for constantly changing products and new designs. We're going to do a lot of cool stuff there. And if you would like to help us continue to create discussions and programming like this and enjoy some exclusive items like our Ask Us Anything sessions and special extended versions of our discussions, patreon.com/thought to action. For our panel at the Herb London Center for Policy Research, I'm Chris Cordani. Thank you. Stay informed and make your day a great one.